Now, this is what I mean by handling the pots and having a much better look round than normal. This Dendrobium phalaenopsis type, this is Thai Angel, got some nice blooms on at the moment. This is on the repotting list. It's been in this pot quite a while, and looking down at the top of the pot we've got some mould. Now, I don't remember seeing that last time. Inspecting the pot, it's just round the surface of the pot. It's not right down in the pot as such yet, and it's probably not doing a lot of harm, but nonetheless it is a mould and it shouldn't be there. Now, when that gets repotted, that'll get sorted out, and I could wait for that point, but what I was hoping with this plant was to see some signs of new growth at the base before I repot it, so I was trying to wait. But as I can see it, and I know it's there, I'm just going to give the top of the pot a good soak with the fungicide. Just let that trickle down over the bark. As I said, those white dots are only at the very top of the pot, so it's a relatively new thing in this pot only. So I'm just going to give that a good soaking with a fungicide, and put that to one side, because obviously if I water it now I'll wash all the fungicide off, so I'll leave that one to soak and probably not water that until last, till that fungicide's had plenty of time to do its job. But this is what you spot when you give a plant a good look over. It's the point you find perhaps there's a few mealybugs getting in a couple of leaf joints. You know, perish the thought you find things like spider mites or scale, but unless you have that good look round, you won't spot them, you know, and that's unusual. I very rarely get mould in any of my pots. I had it in my big Nobly last year. I've had a couple of minor little white spots near the top of other pots, time to time, and quite honestly they're more prone to getting going in this time of year because the pots stay wet longer, so they've got a better environment to grow in. Come the better weather, the pots are going to dry faster and they don't really get a chance to get going. But this time of year it's possible, and although those little white spot bits of mould or fungus or whatever it is, hopefully now dead, I don't think it really does any harm. All it's going to do really is speed up the breaking down process, because that's how it works. But it's not really going to harm the plant unless it totally takes over the pot. But yeah, precautionary spray. Now again, at individual pot level, this is a, what is it, radiata, I just can't remember what, Prosthetia perhaps? Anyway, it's radiata. Highly fragrant blooms when it does, and it does have a sheath as it happens. But the latest section of this plant pushed out a lot of roots, and it's still got a lot of active growing tips. And that plant is almost dry where all the roots are, but round here where there's hardly any roots, it's still wet at the bottom. You see what I mean? Once you get the active roots down into the bottom of the pot, that layering effect just disappears because the roots can get at it. So this one, round the area where all the roots are, is going to get a hell of a soak because it's dry. And that really is a soak. It's in pure bark. It hasn't been in that bark too long, so that bark is still quite hard. So it's going to get a soak. Notice I'm only watering half the pot. Not a lot of point in watering the back of the pot where there's no roots, is there? So I'm quite happy to leave that part of the pot totally dry. Now obviously that water's going to, you know, move off one piece of bark and drip onto another piece, and there'll probably be some water in the other half. But the soaking is done where the roots are. So that's that one. Now this is a pot full of Bulbophyllum Elizabethan Buckleberry, and part of the plants decided to come out the side of the pot. They do that, flipping nuisance really. And another new growth out here has sort of taken its position up on the pot rim. So the roots on those parts of the plant are dry. They're aerial. and it's very difficult to do much about that without separating those bits off. I'm just going to try something gently. I'm just going to see if that part of that rhizome, now, I was going to see if it would bend round, but it won't, it'll break. Now I could choose to break that off and plant it, but it then turns into an offshoot, doesn't it? Whereas at the moment it's got the support of the rest of the rhizomes. Now this one's pushing up a new growth here, and this aerial piece here is also pushing up a new growth. I know they're new growths because this bulb has already flowered once. There's the old spike, so it ain't going to do it again, but it is pushing up a new growth. This pot is still wet. It's not soaking wet, but it's still wet. So no water for you, just put it to one side. It's just going to miss a run. Now I do that this time of year. If it was in the longer days with the warmer temperatures, I'd water it anyway, because those do like to stay moist. But this time of year when it's cooler, the next time I come round to pick that pot up, it will be quite dry, and then it can have a good soak, but not this time. You have to excuse this section, the camera is just propped. It's not on the tripod or anything, because it can't be bothered to get all that out and muck about. But while I'm watering, I think. Now we've just had a look at what is a pot full of a bulbophyllum, yeah, which is now climbing out of the pot, which means I've got aerial roots which are difficult to hydrate. Now what I will do is pour some water over that and just over that edge, but I don't specifically want to water the pot at this time. That's bulbophyllum Elizabeth Ann Buckleberry, and so is that. When I repotted it, I took 3 back bulbs off because they were in the way and chucked them in a pot, and I thought you'll either grow or you won't. Well, each back bulb produced a new growth. They are weak new growths, much smaller bulbs than they should be, but they're now all producing roots, and that one there is also producing a new growth. I don't know whether you can see it on the end of my finger there. So, as is this one. So these new bits are now starting to grow. Well, what about taking the big one out of its pot, taking those that are now growing back bulbs out of the pot, and making a big pot full? It's one of my newer holy clay pots that were a gift. It's a bowl, yeah, so it's not too deep. They're not deep rooters, they're shallow rooters. And I can crock the bottom of the base of that, yeah, and then put some medium in there and hope it all doesn't fall out of the holes, and set up all of the pieces from both of those pots arranged around that bowl. And that's a clay bowl, and looking at it, it's quite a porous one. That looks like quite soft clay. So yeah, a pot full of bulbophyllum Elizabeth Ann Buckleberry, with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 new leads, or leads that will progress. So in a season, that's a bowl full, isn't it? So always thinking. Don't concentrate on one thing, think ahead. And although those back bulbs have recently been done, and the bulbophyllum itself, the mother plant, hasn't long been repotted, it was done, I forget, last year sometime, middle of the season I think, probably not the best time, but I'm quite happy to give that another go in that pot and get a good pot full. The more leads, the more chances of blooms, so that's a plan for the future. I know what somebody's going to say, can you film that? Well, of course I will, but that's not a now thing, that's a bit later in the year. So yeah, good idea I think. Now this one I've just picked up is bone dry, and the reason, it didn't get watered last time because it was still wet. So and this time of year, that plant like that drying off is not a big deal. It's got a hell of a root system, that's why it is capable of drying the whole pot, but it's not really in a huge amount of active growth. The new growths on it are maturing. Here you can see the bulbs formed, so it's maturing, and again here, and the other big one in the middle of the pot decided to come up through the middle of the plant. It is quite possible that that big one there may actually bloom. That's a Miltonia actually, Miltonia flavescens, so a Miltonia species. And I didn't buy that really. There was a Zygopetalum in the auction that I wanted, and in the box it was a case of you either buy all 3 plants or you don't get any of them. This was one of the 2 other plants that were in there. The other one was Peggy Ruth Carpenter, which is a nice bloom if I ever get it to, but it was a weak plant. This one didn't look that good. I potted it up and it grew like mad last season. So it's come on very well in one season, and now we'll see what it does. There's actually a new growth there, which I've got some water in. So a quick huff and a puff, remove those droplets of water on a new growth, good idea. Can't always do it, I don't always spot it. But that's pushed out a very good root system since I repotted it, and some new growths, and it might bloom on that one. It's plenty big enough. We shall see. But yeah, that's come on well. So although I didn't specifically aim to buy that, we'll see what it does. Interesting to see what the blooms are like. Maybe one day, perhaps. And now it's one of my favourite times. It's sploot time. Once the water's warmed up, these are the first to go in. Make sure the whole mount gets wet. There we go. And those can just be left there for a while now till I'm ready to deal with them, and then they can come out and have a drip, and then something else can go in the bucket. But all that's left to do now is that shelf and the non-resting mounts, which I will leave till last. And it has totally clouded over, so the other chore I might have had to do was put the temporary shade netting up. Well, no, I don't. But prior to doing what I've done and doing that, there's a natural sort of break there. So you know what happens in a natural break point? Coffee time! Now there are some plants when I'm watering that cause me grief, and this is one of them. It's a smashing plant, don't get me wrong. This is Dendrobium hibiki, and this tends to bloom from the base of older canes. Well, I haven't got many of them because they're nearly all new canes, so I don't expect this one to bloom in the near future. But it's in this sort of coconutty peaty stuff, and if I pour water in there, a load of that's going to wash off into my bowl, and then it just looks horrible, and it's going to get in all the other pots. So that one has to wait till last, or when I'm nearly out of water and I'm about to change it. That's on the repotting list for obvious reasons, you know me. And looking at it, this peaty stuff is round the top of the pot. So I've got a horrible feeling what's underneath it is different and could be totally broken down. Luckily with that plant, it has a lot of aerial roots on it, and although it's not normally a mounted dendrobium, every one I've ever seen of these has always been in a pot. That doesn't mean to say it can't be mounted, and given that most of what are probably its only good roots, because I hate to think what's in that pot, I might mount it at least for this season so that those aerial roots can get into something reasonably quickly, because obviously I can, you know, surround the base with some moss and tuck those roots inside. It is a branching root system, yeah, so I mean if that gets in some moss, those roots should really push on, and then perhaps later in the year it can go in a pot. As I say, I've never seen one of these mounted. That doesn't mean to say it can't be mounted. It does tend to have a lax growth. It does tend to grow out sideways as well as upright. So it might not look bad. I might just put it in one of my new holy clay pots, but it's on the repotting list, and it's coming up to the front of the list quite quickly because it gives me grief when I'm watering. Because literally loads of that peaty stuff just washes off. I don't like it. So that one's coming soon. Now, this dendrobium is on the repotting list simply because it hasn't been repotted since I got it, but it's in good bark. This is not breaking down in any shape or form, so it was not classed as an urgent repot. It was classed as when I'm ready, or when the plant's ready. Well, I'm ready, and I think the plant is. It's having a little spurt of new root growth at the base of these latest 2 canes, which are enormous. That's my only antelope type. It's Dendrobium black antelope. But now is quite a good time. Yeah, the canes have matured, they've got their terminal leaf, so it's now not really in active growth, but on those matured canes, the new root system's starting, which is more important. You know, what's going on in the top of the plant needs to be considered when you repot to get your timing right, but what's going on down here is far more important. And at the moment, I think in that pot is a very good root system. Now, decisions, that's not a plant to mount. It's a bolt upright plant. That would look silly on a mount. And the only way to mount that would be to have the plant at the base of the mount, and the top of the plant will stick up in the air so much that where would I hang it? It would be touching the roof because the plant's tall. So that's a pot plant, definitely. That goes in a pot. But it's, yeah, now wouldn't be a bad time. A lot of new root growth. So I'll update my notes that the new roots come on this plant when the canes are mature. And then in a few years' time, I'll have that reference point to know when to look out for a repot time. But yeah, that can move towards the top of the repotting list. Not urgent, still not urgent, but now would be a good time. Lots of new roots coming out. Now I can kill several birds with one stone on this one. This is my Sideria japonica, or now Phalaenopsis japonica. Somebody asked how it was doing and has it got any buds yet? Well, it's growing a spike, and underneath that spike is a mealybug. And just looking round the top of the pot, can you see that little flurry of white on top of that piece of bark in there, on the end of my finger? Well, that could be scale. It could be a little outbreak of mealybugs, and that's where the eggs were laid. Yeah? Either. Yeah? There's another bit of white there, not to be confused. That bit of white there is just a piece of white on the bark. The Orchiata bark just does that sometime. I think it's actually calcium. But nonetheless, we have bugs. Yeah? As far as the plant goes, the older leaves on this are not happy. They are suffering with something I went over a while ago, which is the pale patches. But the latest 2 leaves aren't too bad. Yeah, so I'm happy that whatever that was now isn't. The trouble is with Phalaenopsis leaves, once they've got a problem like that, you've got to live with them for a long, long time. But we do have a spike, so we should get some blooms. But we also have some bugs, which I will deal with now. Now this one didn't get watered last time. Now it's looking a bit dry, and you can see the layering really well there. It's still very, very slightly damp at the bottom of the pot, but the top of the pot, where all the roots are, is bone dry. So I have to water that whether I want to or not. Yeah, I've got to get some water in on these top roots. This hasn't got the best of root systems, but it's got one. I think, quite honestly, that would do better on a mount. I really do. It's never going to grow that big. I'll think about it. But anyway, somebody asked about that plant. There you go. Now, I'm not immune from doing stupid things, and that's up the top of the list of stupid things that I did last year. That's actually an Odontoglossum species. It's now Evian. It was in bloom when I got it, and I had to bully the guy to get his sample plant, because he had lots of smaller plants for sale that weren't in bloom. And his sort of show plant that he was using to attract attention to his smaller plants was the one I bullied out of him eventually. He said, well, all right, you can have it, but you're not having it till the end of the show. So I said, done. And I got a discount. Good plant, good sized plant, pushing up loads of new growths, but they're not maturing at the same size as the older growths. The stupid thing is, why the hell did I put it in a black pot And why the hell did I put it in a deep pot? I haven't got a clue what's going on underneath that plant. So that's coming up to the top of the list. That's a cool grower. Yeah, so leaving that till late spring, just as we go into the hotter season, would be a daft idea. So that's one of those that pushes to the front of the queue because of the time of year. You know, if that is pushing out new growths, new roots under those new growths, now would be a good time to get that in a pot where I can see what's going on. But first job is to get it out and see what's going on. Oh, why I did that, I really do not know. But anyway, that's got multiple reasons for getting repotted. The new growths don't seem to be as vigorous as they should be, which normally means the roots aren't doing so well. And another reason is I can't see what the roots are doing, which I don't like, especially on a new plant. You know, once I've had plants a while, I'd be happy to put them in black pots or whatever, simply because I know the routine of the plant. I know what it's doing. This one I don't know, so that was a daft idea. We'll remedy that. Well, that wasn't a bad guess. Little bit of waste. But basically I've finished doing all the pots now, so that's that session done. I don't even need to think about looking at pots for a while now. The only thing I have got to do, I've got a couple of potted phalaenopsis in the house that I need to just use up that last bit of water on. The Paphiopedilums in the house were done relatively recently. They don't need looking at today. And then what's left to do is the non-resting mounted orchids, which have been, they've had a CalMag followed by a feed, so it's their turn for a flush. So obviously I've got to, you know, finish up that last bit of water and then re-sterilise the bowl and just get some clean RO water to do the non-resting mounts. And that'll be it for the day, for now anyway. Well, if you think you're staying in the pot, think again. That's the size Phalaenopsis, the mini phals, that I do like to see mounted. Although it's doing okay in its pot and it has got a spike, because of the way that will get mounted that way up, if I do it now, the spike looks silly because all the blooms are upside down. So in this case I will wait till it finishes blooming, not because it will do the plant any harm, but simply because of the aesthetics. You know, that spike was allowed to arch naturally and the blooms have all opened the right way up as a consequence. If I turn the plant upside down now, the blooms will look silly. So we'll carry on enjoying those while they're there. There's a nice bit of colour inside the house as well. So that's not an urgent repot. The media's not breaking down, but I think it would look nice on a mount. I don't think it's going to grow any better or worse. It just will look nice on a mount. But not yet, because as I say, I don't want to upset the blooms and turn them upside down. Now these two always get dunked in the bucket together. There's a reason that's got nothing to do with the plants. It's to do with what they are in and what happens when I put them in the bucket. The large wooden basket floats, yeah? So it doesn't get down far enough in the bucket without doing something about it. The Rhynchoridis Bangkok Sunset, if I put that in the bucket, it sinks. I end up with the whole plant under the water, which is okay, but because that's going to hang upright, there would be a lot of water left in the leaf joints and, you know, possibly even in the crown. But when I put them in together, they're sort of semi-jammed in. So the Rhynchoridis holds the basket under the water and stops it floating, and the basket stops that one sinking in too far and getting the whole plant soaking wet. So the pair of them just get, you know, the plant roots hydrated and not the plants. That spike's going to have to come off when I get it out of there, because that's gone. The spike itself is withering quite badly already, and all the blooms have gone. So it's serving no purpose, and in this case I will take that spike off. I could leave it to die back, but it will be unsightly, and who knows how long it'll take, so it's coming off. That's my decision. So that's why those two go in together. Logic in there, not anything to do with the plants, just how I like to get just the roots in the bucket and either not have it floating around or sinking too deep. While we're on the subject of dunking buckets, my idea of getting a second container, probably a very wide, shallow one, to dunk my other mounts in basically is a no-no. I've rethought it through, and I can just show you quickly why. That's a bulbophyllum. I could throw that in the water, that would be fine. Blimey, that looks like it might have a spike coming. Mind you, the last one that looked like that turned out to be a new growth. That would stand being thrown in the bucket. That probably would. That won't. That plant is very susceptible to watermarks on the leaves. I water that very carefully all around the edge. I do not leave any water on those leaves, and if I get some drops on the leaves I blow it off straight away. I could throw that one in. That's a rescue plant. I don't want to get that plant wet. That plant's got a spike. I don't want to get that plant wet. So you see what I'm getting at? I end up having to make decisions. Is this one okay to dunk in a container or not? And quite honestly, I'd rather carry on the way I am, which I'll show you now. Okay, I'll just go along this back row here, some of which I've just shown. The bulbophyllum's still wet, doesn't need watering. This Rodriguesiae dries out fast and may go in a pot as a consequence. Probably in one of the holy pots. The fact that it produces loads of aerial roots, it does like to do it, if you see what I mean. But and if this one gets a bit of water on the leaves, it doesn't matter. It's also got a load of roots around the back of the mount. Don't forget them. And these, I'm lucky, because where they live, they can drip where they flipping like. I don't care. This is a little Orangus. This one hydrates lovely. As soon as the water gets on the roots, they go green. Love water in this one. But again, the odd water spot on this one doesn't seem to matter. So it could get thrown in a bucket, but if I threw it in a bucket, it would have to sit there for a while. Whereas that took seconds. This is the dodgy one. Yeah? This one does not like water on its leaves. It produces spots, and I've seen it happen, so I'm very wary. So I water around the edges. And I can see I've already got some water on a couple of leaves. So we'll use Roger's patented method of getting water off of leaves, which is called huff and puff. There we go. And that's that one done. Don't try that in a pot full of small bark, will you? Because most of the bark will be on the floor by the time you've huffed and puffed. That's that one done. Now this tiny little recovering plant here, I don't want to get wet. Most of its roots are in the moss, so all I need to do is hydrate the moss carefully. Try not to get the plant wet, so just gently. And it doesn't need to be absolutely soaked because it's not growing much. And then there's my Orangus fastuosa with two lovely spikes coming, which I don't want to get wet. So again, round the edges. That one done, and then this one, doesn't matter whether it gets wet or not. Looking forward to some new growths on that one. Actually looks like it might have some buds, but last time it did that they turned out to be kikis. So we'll wait and see. That's a Dendrobium moniliform with variegated leaves. It's quite an attractive plant. And that's that whole row done in that amount of time. Think how long it would have taken if these had to be left to soak, and at the moment I'm only watering non-resting mounts. What would I do in between? Sit and twiddle me thumbs. So I like it that way. I think that's the way it's going to stay for now. And this is a classic example of the sort of plant that would be very difficult to put in a bucket of any shape or form because of the shape of the plant. Yeah, it's growing out in all directions, it's hanging down a long way, and the only bit that needs watering is that bit. So you can sort of see the logic of why perhaps I'm not so keen on doing the dunk idea, because I'd end up with some that can and some that can't. You know, that's going to take me 10 seconds to water that. Literally. If that. Okay, thinking on the go at the moment, there are some plants like this one that ought to have a more prolonged soak other than just pouring water over. I mean, this pushed up a nice new cane. This is the one that bloomed, and the bloom self-pollinated on the second day of opening, and I didn't get a chance to photograph it. So we missed it, and it was quite nice too. So, you know, obviously we've got to look forward to the next cane. It is said that these spikes can extend, but I don't think that one will. You know, still a young plant effectively, but that one would benefit from a good soak. So simple answer. Let's just use the Vanda bucket and reduce the feed level. Yeah? I mean, it is said that Vandas are high feeders, but when you're feeding at every single watering, I think that will be enough for them. So I can just use that basically for the few mounts that I've got that could do with a more prolonged soak. The reason is these roots don't hydrate very well. You know, you pour water over them and they stay that silvery colour. They're reluctant to absorb the moisture quickly, so I could be under-hydrating the plant. But by giving it a soak and giving it time under water, it will take in enough hydration. So some of my mounts really could do with that soak. So easy answer is just use that bucket and just reduce the feed level down to something more suitable for a general feed for anything that's going to go in there. Yeah, so that saves having a separate container and messing about. And although that will slow me down a bit, it could be worthwhile.